There's a sound wolves make when they encounter something they don't understand. Not aggression, not submission, something else. A vocalization that sits between whine and growl, uncertainty given voice. I heard it for the first time in October 2006, deep in the Boundary Waters canoe area, and I've heard it exactly 17 times since, always in the same general region, always at distances that suggest the wolves are retreating, not approaching, always when the other thing is near. My name is Marcus Webb. For 18 years, I tracked what the locals call the Dogman, sightings reported across the northern Minnesota wilderness dating back to the 1800s. Bipedal canid, 7 to 9 feet tall, intelligence that exceeds any known predator. I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in apex predator behavior, formerly with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, currently operating independently under federal research permits that expire in 6 months and won't be renewed. I've documented 41 encounters across 127,000 acres of boreal forest. I've collected hair samples that defy taxonomic classification. I've recorded vocalizations that no wolf, bear, or human could produce. I've photographed tracks that measure 19 inches long with claw marks that suggest something between Canis lupus and something we've lost the fossil record for. And on November 3, 2024, my patrol partner, Ranger Sarah Chen, 28 years old, 6 years field experience, vanished during a routine boundary survey along the Gunflint Trail corridor. Her GPS signal stopped transmitting at exactly mile marker 47, near a section of forest I've designated Zone 7 in my private documentation, the area where encounter frequency is highest, where wolf packs refuse to establish territory, where the tree scoring patterns suggest something tall enough to reach marks 12 feet above ground level. Search and rescue found her vehicle. Engine running, driver's door open, radio still transmitting static, her service weapon holstered, her pack intact, coffee still warm in the cup holder, no sign of struggle, no blood, no tracks except hers leading away from the vehicle toward the tree line, and then nothing, like she'd been lifted straight into the air. The official investigation concluded after 72 hours. Disappearance under undetermined circumstances. Search suspended due to incoming weather system. Case remains open pending new evidence. But I know what happened at mile 47, because I've been hunting the thing responsible for 18 years. And now it's my turn to explain why some hunts should never begin, and why some predators are apex for reasons that transcend biology. This is the account of what I found, what I lost, and what's still out there, waiting in the boreal darkness. The first documented encounter happened before I was born, August 1969. A logging crew working near the Canadian border reported something attacking their camp at night. Not stealing food, attacking the structures themselves. Tents shredded, equipment scattered. One man claimed he saw it. Bigger than any wolf, walked like a man, eyes that reflected red in the flashlight beam. The company relocated the crew. No investigation. The incident was filed as probable bear activity, despite the fact that the damage patterns matched nothing in known ursine behavior. Similar reports surfaced sporadically over the next 3 decades. Hunters losing kills to something that left prints too large for wolves. Campers reporting something circling their sites at night. Bipedal movement, heavy breathing, vocalizations that made their dogs cower. Resort owners finding livestock killed with precision that suggested intelligence rather than hunger. The pattern was consistent. Superior National Forest, northern regions, concentrated around the wilderness corridor between Ely and Grand Marais, always in areas with minimal human presence, always during transition seasons, late fall, early spring, when prey animals were stressed and vulnerable, but no bodies, no DNA, no definitive proof beyond anecdotal reports that law enforcement and wildlife officials dismissed as misidentification, folklore, or attention-seeking. I started investigating in 2006, fresh out of graduate school with a doctorate in predator ecology, and the arrogance of someone who believed everything could be explained by careful observation and scientific method. My entry point was a timber wolf study. I'd been contracted by the DNR to assess pack dynamics following the species removal from the endangered list. Standard research, track collars, population surveys, prey availability analysis. But one pack, designation Border Lakes 7, exhibited anomalous behavior. They'd abandoned prime territory without explanation. Their core range showed all the markers of ideal wolf habitat: adequate prey density, water access, denning sites. Yet the entire pack had relocated 30 miles south into marginal territory, already occupied by competing packs. Something had displaced them. I found evidence in late October 2006, following Border Lake 7's abandoned territory, documenting why they'd left. The forest was quiet, unnaturally so. No bird calls, no squirrel activity, the kind of silence that indicates a major predator is near. I found the marking post at dusk. A white pine, diameter roughly 30 inches with claw marks running from ground level to approximately 10 feet high. Deep furrows, at least half an inch penetration into sapwood, spaced in a pattern that suggested 4 digits plus opposable thumb. No bear makes marks like that. Bears use trees for territorial marking, but the scoring is broader, shallower, and typically concentrated between 4 and 7 feet high. This was different. This was something tall enough to reach 10 feet while standing flat-footed, strong enough to penetrate hardwood with casual effort, and intelligent enough to mark at the territorial boundary where wolves would encounter it most frequently. I collected samples from the furrows, bark fragments showing organic residue. Later analysis at the University of Minnesota lab would show keratin composition consistent with canid claws, but the size and structure suggested something scaled beyond any known species. I set up camera traps, 4 units positioned to monitor the marking post and surrounding approaches. Motion-activated, infrared-capable 7-day battery life. I checked them on November 2, 2006. 6 days of data. Hundreds of triggers showing normal forest activity. Deer, foxes, ravens, one brief appearance by a black bear. And then, on November 1st at 11:47 p.m. something appeared. The image was partially obscured. The subject had approached from an angle that kept most of its body outside the frame. But what was visible? A massive shoulder covered in gray-brown fur, musculature that suggested quadrupedal ancestry, but bipedal adaptation, and part of a head, elongated snout, ears pointed and erect, but the skull structure was wrong for Canis lupus. Too robust, too heavy. The creature had deliberately avoided full exposure. It had identified the camera and maneuvered to minimize documentation while investigating the equipment. That suggested intelligence, planning, awareness of human surveillance methods. I was looking at something that understood it was being hunted. I spent the next 2 years establishing baseline data, expanded camera coverage to 37 units across the region, documented 17 additional marking posts, collected hair samples from 3 separate locations, coarse guard hairs, gray-brown coloration, microscopy showing medulla patterns inconsistent with known North American canids. I submitted samples for genetic analysis at 3 separate labs, identifying them only as unknown canid, northern Minnesota. Results were contradictory. High similarity to Canis lupus but with anomalous chromosomal structures, suggesting either contamination or an undescribed subspecies. One geneticist noted, "If I didn't know better, I'd say this was from a prehistoric canid that survived into modern times. But that's impossible. Impossible." That word would define the next decade of my work. By 2010, I had documented 9 visual encounters, all partial, shadows moving through timber, shapes at extreme distance, thermal signatures that registered larger than any known mammal in the region. Nothing definitive, nothing that would satisfy peer review or justify official designation as a novel species. But the behavioral evidence was overwhelming. Wolf packs avoided specific territories. Elk herds modified their migration patterns to circumvent certain corridors. Black bears, normally territorial and aggressive, abandoned established ranges without apparent cause. The entire ecosystem was responding to an apex predator that shouldn't exist. I interviewed locals, old-timers who'd lived on the forest edge for generations. They had stories, always vague, always secondhand, but consistent in detail. Something big, something smart, something that ain't quite wolf and ain't quite bear. The Ojibwe communities had names for it, variations on a theme that translated roughly to brother wolf who walks upright. But when I pressed for details, I encountered cultural boundaries. Some things aren't meant to be hunted, one elder told me. Some things are older than treaties. You track that, you're asking for trouble. I thanked him and continued my research. I didn't listen. I should have. The first confirmed photograph came in March 2012. I'd positioned a high-resolution camera trap on a known game trail, elevated 15 feet in a tree to avoid tampering. The location, a narrow corridor between 2 ridgelines, functioned as a natural funnel for animals moving between feeding and bedding areas. The image captured on March 17th at 2:34 a.m. showed the creature in three-quarter profile, mid-stride, approximately 40 feet from the camera position. Even accounting for distance and perspective, the measurements were staggering. Height, approximately 8 feet 3 inches at the shoulder when standing upright. Weight, estimated 450 to 500 pounds based on stride depression in snow and comparative analysis with known megafauna. Fur, thick gray-brown coat with darker mane-like guard hairs along the neck and shoulders. The head structure was the most striking feature. Elongated snout similar to Canis lupus, but the skull was broader, more robust. Ears were large and erect, wolf-like but proportionally smaller relative to head size. The eyes showed significant tapetum lucidum reflection, that eye shine common in nocturnal predators, but the color was amber-red rather than the green-yellow typical of wolves. The limbs showed clear bipedal adaptation. The hind legs were digitigrade but with heel placement suggesting partial plantigrade capability, similar to how bears can shift between postures. The forelimbs were shorter than typical quadrupeds but longer than human arms, ending in visible digits with pronounced claws. This was not a wolf. This was not a bear. This was something that represented either an undescribed species or an evolutionary branch we'd lost the fossil record for. I submitted the image to 3 cryptozoology research organizations and 2 academic institutions, identifying the location only as northern Minnesota wilderness. Responses ranged from cautious interest to outright dismissal. Several colleagues suggested digital manipulation. Others theorized costume hoax. No one was willing to stake their reputation on declaring this genuine, so I continued alone. By 2014, I had established territorial patterns. The creature, I'd begun thinking of it as Subject Alpha in my documentation, maintained a range of approximately 300 square miles. Core territory centered around Zone 7, the area near mile marker 47 on the Gunflint Trail, with seasonal extensions during spring and fall. Movement patterns correlated strongly with ungulate migration. When deer populations moved to lower elevations in late fall, Subject Alpha followed. When elk returned to summer range in late spring, Alpha adjusted accordingly. This was predatory behavior, but the sophistication exceeded anything in known wolf ecology. Wolves hunt cooperatively within pack structures. Alpha hunted alone using terrain and weather to maximum advantage, demonstrating tactical planning that suggested advanced cognition. I documented 3 kill sites in 2014. All showed similar characteristics: cervical dislocation rather than throat tear, suggesting immense bite force and precise killing technique; partial consumption, only high-value organs and tissue, indicating selective feeding rather than hunger-driven scavenging; and concealment behavior, remains buried under forest debris or dragged into dense cover. The kills were clean, professional. This wasn't a creature driven by bloodlust. This was a highly efficient predator taking what it needed and nothing more. In 2016, I had my first direct encounter. I was conducting overnight observation in Zone 7, positioned in an elevated blind approximately 20 feet up a large white pine. Night vision equipment, thermal imaging, audio recording, completely silent and downwind. Alpha approached at 1:47 a.m. I watched through thermal imaging as the heat signature moved through the forest below me. Massive, bipedal, moving with casual confidence through terrain that would challenge even experienced humans. It stopped directly beneath my position. I stopped breathing, every survival instinct screaming that I'd been detected, that I was in a predator's strike zone with no escape route. Alpha looked up. Even through thermal imaging, I could see the head tilt, the focused attention, the assessment happening in real time. It knew I was there, knew exactly where I was, and was deciding what to do about it. We stayed like that for perhaps 40 seconds, predator and observer locked in mutual awareness. Then Alpha made a sound. Not a howl. That would be too simple. It was a vocalization that started low in the chest and built to a resonant, almost harmonic call that seemed to vibrate through my ribcage. Not aggressive, not submissive, communicative. Then it walked away. Deliberately, without fear, without haste. The message was clear. I was being tolerated, watched, assessed, and deemed non-threatening enough to ignore. But that tolerance was conditional, and if I crossed whatever boundary Alpha had established, the tolerance would end. I started changing my approach. Less invasive observation, reduced camera coverage, longer intervals between field visits. I was being taught, through experience and implicit threat, how to coexist with something that could kill me without effort but chose not to. The research community, what little remained engaged with my work, noticed the change. "You've gone native," one colleague wrote. "You're anthropomorphizing apex predator behavior into some kind of noble, savage narrative. That's not science." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was projecting human frameworks onto something that operated by completely different rules. But after 10 years of observation, I knew this. Alpha was intelligent. Alpha was aware. And Alpha had made deliberate choices about how to respond to human presence in its territory. Those choices suggested something beyond instinct. They suggested consciousness. By 2020, I documented 37 separate encounters. Visual confirmations ranging from partial shadows to full-body thermal signatures. Audio recordings showing vocalizations with structural complexity suggesting proto-language. Physical evidence including hair samples, scat, tracks, and kill patterns. But still no DNA proof, no skeletal remains, no definitive evidence that would force official recognition. And increasingly, I wasn't sure I wanted that recognition, because official designation meant official management. It meant research teams, media attention, management protocols, and eventual attempts at capture or elimination. I'd spent 14 years tracking something extraordinary, and the closer I got, the more I realized, maybe some apex predators survive precisely because they remain undocumented. Maybe Subject Alpha had survived this long not despite human expansion, but by learning to anticipate it, avoid it, and when necessary, respond to it with calculated precision. Maybe the greatest predator wasn't the strongest or fastest. Maybe it was the smartest. And maybe I was finally smart enough to realize I was out of my depth. November 3rd, 2024. The day Sarah Chen vanished. She joined the DNR as a wildlife ranger 3 years prior. Competent, careful, exactly the kind of field professional the service needed. We'd worked together on wolf population surveys, shared patrol duties in the Superior National Forest, and developed the easy camaraderie of people who understand that nature demands respect, not conquest. I'd never told her about Subject Alpha, never mentioned 18 years of documentation, never explained why I specifically requested patrol assignments in Zone 7, or why I sometimes hiked off trail in areas that had no official management justification. She thought I was just thorough, dedicated to comprehensive ecosystem monitoring. She had no idea what was out there. November 3rd started routine. We'd planned a boundary survey along the Gunflint Trail, checking trail markers, documenting erosion, updating GPS waypoints for winter closure protocols. Standard end-of-season work. Sarah drove the lead vehicle. I followed in my truck. We'd planned to work the corridor from mile 40 to mile 55, split the area, and finish by mid-afternoon. We separated at mile 44. She'd take the northern section. I'd cover south. Radio check-in every 30 minutes. Standard protocol. Her first check-in came at 09:45. North section clear, good trail condition. Moving to waypoint 7. Second check-in at 10:15. Unusual tree damage near waypoint 8. Looks like claw scoring but wrong height pattern. You want photos? My blood went cold. Yes. Send photos and stay on trail. Do not investigate off-path. Copy. Stand by. 3 minutes later, photos came through on the shared tablet system. White pine trunk. Scoring marks starting at 8 feet and extending to 11 feet. Fresh. Sap still weeping. The familiar pattern of 4 digits plus opposable thumb. Alpha had marked territory within the last 24 hours, and Sarah was standing right at the boundary. I radioed immediately. Sarah, return to vehicle now. Do not proceed further north. Acknowledge. Static. Sarah, acknowledge. More static. Then her voice distorted. Marcus, do you hear that? Hear what, Sarah? Return to vehicle immediately. It's like wolves, but different. God, it's loud. How many wolves? The transmission cut to static. I was in my truck within seconds. Drove north on the trail, pushing the vehicle faster than the rough forest road warranted. Tried radio repeatedly. Sarah, respond. Sarah, acknowledge. Nothing. I reached her position at mile 47 at 10:27 hours. Her DNR truck was parked on the shoulder, exactly where protocol dictated. Engine running, driver's door open, radio handset hanging from the mounting bracket still transmitting static. No Sarah. I grabbed my pack, emergency beacon, GPS tracker, service weapon, first aid. Started calling her name. Checked the immediate area. Found her tracks leading from the vehicle toward the tree line, clear in the soft forest floor. Followed them for maybe 40 feet. Then they stopped. Not gradually. Not with signs of running or struggle. They just ended, like she'd been lifted straight up. I looked at the canopy overhead. Dense pine and birch. Branches interlocking. No way to climb that fast. No way to vanish that completely. But the track stopped. I activated my emergency beacon and called it in. This is Webb, reporting missing ranger. Last known position mile 47, Gunflint Trail. Ranger Chen. Immediate assistance required. The response was professional but slow. Nearest backup was 40 minutes away. Helicopter dispatch weather dependent. Search protocols initiated, but full response would take hours. I wasn't waiting. I moved into the forest, following instinct more than evidence. The tracks had disappeared, but I knew Alpha's movement patterns, knew the terrain features that provided tactical advantage, knew where something tall and strong would take prey, elevated positions with visibility and defensible approaches. I found the first sign 200 yards in, her radio handset, just lying on the ground, undamaged but deliberately placed, like it had been removed and discarded. 50 yards further, her ranger jacket, torn but not shredded, no blood, removed with care, not violence. The pattern was wrong. Predators don't undress prey. They don't create trails of belongings. This was either something much worse than predation, or something else entirely. I kept moving, deeper into Zone 7, into terrain I'd surveyed for 18 years but never felt comfortable in. The forest was silent, that dead silence that meant everything else had fled. I found her at 11:53 hours, roughly half a mile from her vehicle. She was sitting against a fallen log, conscious but non-responsive, eyes open, breathing steady, no visible injuries. But her expression was blank. Not fear, not confusion, just absence. Sarah, I approached carefully, scanning the surroundings. Sarah, can you hear me? No response. Her eyes tracked me but showed no recognition. I checked vitals. Pulse elevated but strong. Pupils reactive. No signs of head trauma. No wounds. Physically, she was fine. Psychologically, she was somewhere else. I tried my radio. Webb to dispatch, I have located Ranger Chen. Coordinates. I read them off. She's conscious but unresponsive. Requesting immediate medical evacuation. The radio crackled. Copy. Helicopter en route. ETA 25 minutes. Can you transport to nearest clearing? Negative. Subject is non-ambulatory. We'll need basket extraction. Understood. Stand by at current position. I sat with Sarah, trying to keep her warm, trying to get any response. Sarah, it's Marcus. You're safe. Help is coming. Can you tell me what happened? Nothing. Just that blank stare. Then barely whispered, It showed me. Showed you what? Everything. The forest. How it sees. How it thinks. There's so many of them, Marcus. Not just one. Never just one. My blood froze. How many, Sarah? Pack, she whispered. It's not alone. Never alone. They're everywhere. They've always been everywhere. Then her eyes refocused, and she started screaming. The helicopter extracted Sarah at 12:32 hours. She was airlifted to Ely Blumenson Hospital, still unresponsive beyond intermittent screaming and fragmented statements that made no medical sense. The attending physician's preliminary assessment: acute psychological trauma, possible exposure to environmental toxins causing altered mental state, no physical injuries. Recommend psychiatric evaluation and toxicology screening. I knew better. This wasn't toxins. This wasn't psychological break from ordinary stress. Sarah had encountered Alpha, and whatever happened during that encounter had fundamentally broken something in her cognition. The official search and rescue operation ran for 72 hours. 3 teams of 6 rangers each, covering a 2-mile radius from mile 47. K9 units, helicopter thermal imaging. Professional protocols executed flawlessly. They found nothing unusual. No evidence of additional subjects, no pack presence, no secondary tracks. Just normal forest. Deer sign, wolf scat from known packs, black bear claw marks on trees at appropriate heights. It was like Alpha had vanished entirely, or had never been there at all. But I knew the truth. Alpha had concealed itself, deliberately, probably watching the search teams the entire time, from positions carefully chosen to avoid detection. After 72 hours, the search commander, a grizzled veteran named Paulson, pulled me aside. "Marcus, level with me. What the hell happened out there?" "I found her sitting against a log, traumatized but physically unharmed. That's all I know." "That's not all you know. You've been working this forest for 18 years. You request Zone 7 assignment specifically. You've got equipment monitoring areas with no official management justification. What are you tracking?" I met his eyes. "Apex predator behavior. Long-term ecological impact studies." "Bullshit. I've read your official reports. They're competent but generic. Nothing that requires this level of field commitment, so what's really going on?" I made a choice. "Off the record?" "Way off. There's something in Zone 7 that doesn't fit known species classification. Large, intelligent. I've been documenting it for 18 years. Sarah encountered it, and whatever happened during that encounter caused the psychological trauma we're seeing." Paulson was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about the Dogman legends. I'm talking about an unclassified apex predator that's learned to avoid human detection through behavioral adaptation and intelligence that exceeds any known animal. You have proof? 18 years of it. Photos, audio, tracks, hair samples, behavioral data. None of it definitive enough to force official recognition. All of it consistent with a species that survived by remaining undocumented. Why tell me now?" "Because Sarah said something before they evacuated her. She said it's not alone. She said there's a pack. If that's true, if there are multiple individuals operating cooperatively, then we're not dealing with a solitary anomaly. We're dealing with a breeding population. And that changes everything." Paulson stared at the forest. "If that's true and it gets out, this whole area becomes a zoo. Researchers, media, hunters, the forest gets destroyed by the attention, which is why I've kept it quiet for 18 years. And now I don't know. Because if there's a pack, they're more dangerous than I've assumed. And if one of them took Sarah half a mile from her vehicle without leaving tracks, their capabilities exceed what I've documented." Paulson rubbed his face. "What do you need?" "Time. Access to the closure zone before the area reopens, and official backing if I find something that requires immediate management response. I can give you 2 weeks. After that, budget constraints force us to reopen the trails. And Marcus, if you find anything definitive, you bring it to me first. Not the media, not the academic community. Me. We control this narrative, or it controls us." I agreed. 2 weeks. Then everything would change. I visited Sarah in the hospital on November 6th. She'd been moved to psychiatric care, still nonverbal, showing signs of severe PTSD with dissociative features. Her mother was there, a small woman with Sarah's eyes and a grief that transcended language. They won't tell me what happened, just that she experienced something traumatic in the field. Can you help me understand?" I wanted to tell her everything, that her daughter had encountered something extraordinary, that the trauma wasn't weakness but a response to something that shouldn't exist. Instead, I said, "She experienced something unexpected in the forest, something no training prepares you for. She's strong. She'll recover, but it will take time." Sarah's mother looked at me with an expression that suggested she knew I was withholding truth, but she nodded. "Just find whatever did this. Make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." I promised I would. I spent the next week alone in Zone 7. No rangers, no backup. Just me and 18 years of documentation and the growing certainty that I'd fundamentally misunderstood what I was tracking. I reviewed all my encounter data, mapped every sighting, analyzed temporal patterns, and I found something I'd missed, or deliberately ignored, for years. The encounters weren't random. They showed coordination, multiple subjects working different territories simultaneously, communication patterns suggesting pack structure, evidence of cooperative hunting and territorial defense. I'd documented 41 encounters across 18 years, but I'd assumed they were all the same individual, Subject Alpha moving through a large territory. What if they weren't? What if I'd been documenting multiple individuals the entire time? What if Sarah was right? What if there was a pack? If that was true, then everything changed. A breeding population meant permanence. It meant an ecosystem that had evolved to accommodate an apex predator we'd never officially recognized. It meant the legends weren't mythology but observation compressed through generations of oral history. It meant I'd been hunting not an anomaly, but a species. And species don't hide for 18 years because they're weak. They hide because they're smart enough to know what happens when humans discover something rare. November 12th, 2024. I found the den site. It was located in terrain I'd surveyed before. a series of collapsed limestone formations creating natural caves and overhangs. I'd marked the area as possible bear denning habitat in my 2011 survey, but never investigated thoroughly. The approaches were treacherous, steep slopes, dense undergrowth, and geological instability that made the area dangerous for casual exploration. Perfect den characteristics for something that valued security and isolation. I approached at dawn, moving slowly, downwind, every sense heightened. I'd left my radio off, didn't want any electronic signature alerting whatever might be present, carried only observation equipment and my service weapon, though I knew the weapon would be largely psychological comfort if confronted. The primary cave entrance was approximately 8 feet high and 12 feet wide, large enough to accommodate something massive. The approach showed clear traffic patterns, compressed earth, bent vegetation, and the subtle but unmistakable scent of musk, sharp, organic, similar to canid but with undertones that suggested something different. I didn't enter. Instead, I positioned myself 70 yards away with telephoto lens and waited. 4 hours. Complete stillness. Patience learned through 18 years of field observation. At 10:34 hours, movement. A juvenile emerged first. Smaller, maybe 5 feet tall when upright, covered in lighter gray-brown fur with distinctive facial markings. It moved with the awkward energy of adolescence, all legs and uncertain coordination. Then an adult, female judging by size and proportions, perhaps 7 feet tall. She positioned herself near the entrance, scanning the surroundings with systematic precision, before allowing the juvenile to range further. Then another juvenile, and another adult. I watched 4 individuals over the next hour. 2 adults, 2 juveniles, clear family structure, social interaction showing cooperation, communication, play behavior from the juveniles that mirrored what you'd see in wolf packs or primate groups. This wasn't a solitary anomaly. This was exactly what Sarah had said. A pack, a breeding population, evidence of successful reproduction and multi-generational survival in habitat we'd assumed was thoroughly documented. I photographed everything, took nearly 300 images, captured behaviors that clearly showed complex social structure, coordinated care of juveniles, tool use. One adult used a branch to dig for something, roots perhaps or small prey, vocalizations with apparent meaning, different calls that prompted specific responses, territorial awareness. Both adults regularly scanned the surroundings, alert for threats. I was witnessing something that would rewrite our understanding of North American megafauna evolution, proof that something had survived the Pleistocene extinctions or had evolved more recently from canid ancestors through selective pressures we'd failed to document, and I was the only human who knew. The ethical weight hit me gradually as I hiked back to my vehicle. For 18 years I'd operated under the assumption I was tracking a solitary individual, rare, extraordinary, but ultimately doomed by its isolation. Protection meant keeping it hidden until natural death removed the problem organically. But a breeding population changed everything. This wasn't an individual surviving against odds. This was a species persisting in habitat adjacent to human development, raising young, establishing territories, demonstrating all the markers of viable population dynamics. They deserved recognition, official protection, endangered species designation with all the legal frameworks that provided. But recognition meant exposure, and exposure would bring exactly what I'd feared for 18 years. Researchers, media, management protocols, and ultimately the transformation of their habitat into a managed space where their behavior would be documented, analyzed, and constrained. Could they survive that level of attention? Would official protection actually protect them, or just slow the inevitable process of their erasure through human proximity? I called a contact at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Dr. Raymond Chen, a conservation biologist I'd worked with years ago on wolf reintroduction projects, someone I trusted to handle sensitive information appropriately. Ray, I need to discuss something confidential, potentially the most significant discovery of my career. But I need your word it doesn't leave this conversation until we've established protection frameworks. Marcus, you're being dramatic. I'm being careful. Do I have your word? Yes. Of course. What's going on? I told him. Not everything. Not 18 years of documentation, but enough. An unclassified canid, multiple individuals, breeding population, evidence of intelligence exceeding known species, location in the Superior National Forest with specific habitat requirements, Ray was silent for a long time. Then, "You're describing something that shouldn't exist, and yet it does. You have proof? Visual confirmation? DNA samples? Visual confirmation. Photographs. Behavioral documentation. DNA samples are inconclusive, showing canid ancestry but anomalous structures that labs have flagged as either contamination or evidence of undescribed subspecies. Send me what you have. I'll review it confidentially. But Marcus, if this is legitimate, you can't sit on it. Endangered species require immediate protection frameworks. Every day without official designation is a day they're vulnerable to undocumented harm. They've survived without official designation for thousands of years. Maybe secrecy is their protection. Or maybe they're on the edge of extinction and we just haven't noticed because they're too good at hiding. You don't get to make that decision alone." He was right, I knew he was right. But the weight of 18 years of careful secrecy made the leap to disclosure feel like betrayal. I spent the next 3 days organizing my documentation, cataloging photographs chronologically, compiling behavioral observations into coherent reports, creating GPS maps showing encounter locations, den sites, and territorial boundaries. The archive was comprehensive, 18 years of careful scientific observation, all pointing to the same conclusion. An unclassified species had survived in the Superior National Forest through behavioral adaptation, intelligence, and the simple luck of occupying habitat remote enough that human presence remained minimal. But organizing the data forced me to confront something I'd avoided acknowledging. The population was small, 4 individuals confirmed, maybe others. I'd documented evidence suggesting at least 6 separate adults across 18 years, but nowhere near the numbers required for long-term genetic viability. They were surviving, but barely, and time was running out. Climate change was already affecting the boreal ecosystem. Development pressure increased annually. Recreation use expanded. The wild spaces they required were shrinking year by year. Official protection might be their only chance, even if it came with risks I couldn't control. Ray called back on November 15th. "Marcus, I've reviewed your materials. I need you to understand the magnitude of what you're proposing. If this is legitimate, and the photographic evidence suggests it is, you're describing a species that changes our fundamental understanding of North American megafauna persistence." "I know." "No, I don't think you do. This isn't just scientific curiosity. This has immediate implications for land management, conservation policy, potentially even indigenous rights and cultural heritage. The moment this becomes public, everything changes, which is why I've kept it private for 18 years. And that was wrong." His voice was firm. "I understand your protective instincts, but these animals, if they're a viable population, need more protection than one researcher can provide. They need legal status, federal designation, habitat protection with enforcement mechanisms. At what cost? Media attention, research teams, recreation closures that generate political backlash? Yes, all of that. Because the alternative is, they go extinct while we debate whether protecting them is convenient." I had no response, because he was right. "I'm bringing this to the regional director," Ray continued. "With your permission, we'll establish confidential review protocols, assemble a team with appropriate clearances, begin the endangered species designation process immediately. But Marcus, this can't stay secret anymore." I gave him permission. What else could I do? The federal response was faster than I anticipated. Within a week, a team arrived. 3 wildlife biologists, 2 conservation geneticists, 1 law enforcement coordinator, and Ray as project lead. They established a base camp at the Forest Service regional office in Duluth, brought equipment I'd never seen, sophisticated thermal imaging, audio analysis software, genetic sequencing capability that could process samples in real time. They treated my documentation with respect but also skepticism. Scientists trained to question everything, confronted with claims that violated core assumptions about what should be possible. I led them to the den site on November 20th. Small group, just Ray and 2 biologists. The others remained at base camp monitoring via radio and GPS tracking. We approached using protocols I'd refined over 18 years. Downwind, silent, extreme caution. The site was empty. The pack had moved. Evidence suggested recent occupation, scat less than 48 hours old, marking posts freshly scored, but no current presence. "They know we're here," I said quietly. "They've adapted their patterns in response to increased human activity. One of the biologists, Dr. Sarah Tran from UC Berkeley, examined the den entrance with clear wonder. My God, the construction. Look at how they've reinforced the overhang with deliberately placed stones. This isn't just finding natural shelter. This is engineering. Ray was documenting everything. If they've relocated in response to our presence, we need to give them space. Establish observation protocols that minimize disruption. Or, Dr. Tran countered, we need comprehensive documentation before they vanish entirely. We may not get another chance. The eternal conservation debate. Observe without interference, or gather critical data before opportunity passes. Ray made the call. We establish monitoring only. No pursuit, no attempts at closer approach. If they're willing to coexist with minimal human presence, we respect that boundary. Professional decision. But I could see the frustration in the team. Scientists denied the close contact observation their training demanded. The monitoring phase lasted 2 weeks. Camera traps at extreme distances, audio recording equipment, thermal imaging from fixed positions. The pack appeared 3 times, always at night, always at distances that suggested deliberate caution. They knew they were being watched, and they were maintaining boundaries. Dr. Tran analyzed the footage obsessively. The social structure is complex. Look at this interaction. The juvenile approaches the adult female with clear submissive posturing, receives what appears to be food transfer, then moves to a subordinate position while feeding. That's learned behavior, cultural transmission within a pack structure. More than that, the geneticist, Dr. Marcus Lee, added, look at the tool use. That adult is using a branch to extend reach while foraging, modifying the environment through external objects. That's not just intelligence. That's technology, however primitive. The data was extraordinary. Every observation confirmed what I'd suspected for years. These weren't animals operating on instinct. These were beings with culture, technology, and social structures that mirrored what we'd expect from intelligent social species. And we were about to expose them to a world that had driven every other megafauna species to the edge of extinction or beyond. On December 1st, the decision came from Washington. Immediate endangered species designation under emergency protocols. The Superior National Forest Zone 7 would be declared critical habitat with Level 1 protections. No public access, no exceptions, federal enforcement. It was the strongest protection framework available, and it would go into effect within 30 days. But first, the public announcement. Because endangered species designation required transparency. The species had to be named, described, and acknowledged publicly to activate legal protections. Ray broke the news to me. Press conference scheduled for December 15th. We'll present the findings, announce the designation, and establish management protocols. You'll be credited as primary researcher. This is your discovery, Marcus. It's not a discovery, it's an exposure. And I don't want credit. I want them left alone. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive anymore. The best way to leave them alone now is through official protection. And that requires public acknowledgement. I knew he was right. But the weight of 18 years of secrecy made the approaching deadline feel like countdown to catastrophe. The leak happened on December 8th, a week before the scheduled announcement. Someone, we never determined who, released preliminary photos to a cryptozoology website. Within hours, social media explosion. Dogman confirmed. Federal government admits legendary creature real. Minnesota megafauna, new species or surviving Pleistocene predator. Breaking. DNR researcher documents unknown. Canid in Superior National Forest. The internet did what the internet does. Amplified, distorted, and transformed scientific discovery into entertainment. The careful protection frameworks we'd built collapsed under the weight of public curiosity. Within 48 hours, news crews in Grand Marais, cryptozoology enthusiasts trying to breach closure zones, social media treasure hunters offering rewards for photographs. The forest I'd worked 18 years to protect became ground zero for exploitation, and somewhere in the wilderness, a pack of 4 was learning that their world had fundamentally changed. Because of me. December 10th, 2024, 3 days after the leak, 5 days before the official announcement that no longer mattered, I went back to Zone 7 alone, violated closure protocols, disabled my GPS tracker, left my radio behind. I needed to see them one more time before everything changed forever. The forest was different now. Helicopter sounds in the distance, News crews trying to get aerial footage despite FAA restrictions. Distant shouts from civilian hunters breaching the perimeter. The silence I'd known for 18 years was gone, replaced by the noise of human intrusion. I found their den site abandoned, not just relocated, abandoned with finality. The pack had scattered everything that might indicate regular occupation, removed all traces of the juveniles, dismantled the reinforced shelter structures. They were erasing themselves, going dark, becoming myth again because reality had proven too dangerous. I tracked them using methods refined over 18 years. Subtle signs invisible to the search teams and media. A bent branch here, a disturbed patch of ground there, the almost imperceptible path of something massive moving through terrain with purpose. I found them 3 miles north, in terrain so remote and hostile that no casual searcher would reach it. A ravine system carved by glacial meltwater, steep walls, dense canopy, the kind of place that appeared on maps, but existed beyond practical human access. They were there, all 4. The adults positioned protectively around the juveniles, alert and wary in a way I'd never seen before. I stayed at extreme distance, didn't approach, didn't try to observe closely, just stood there, visible, acknowledging their presence without demanding anything. The larger adult, Subject Alpha, the individual I'd tracked for 18 years, looked directly at me, held my gaze for perhaps 30 seconds, and I understood. This was goodbye. This was acknowledgement that the relationship we'd maintained for nearly 2 decades was ending, that the implicit agreement, I observe they tolerate, had been broken by forces neither of us could control. Alpha made a sound, that low, resonant vocalization I'd recorded hundreds of times, but the tone was different, final. Then the pack moved deeper into the ravine, into terrain I couldn't follow, into spaces that would hide them from thermal imaging and aerial surveillance, and every technology we'd developed to make the invisible visible. I watched them disappear, and felt something between grief and relief. They were choosing survival, even if it meant abandoning territory they'd held for generations, even if it meant the juveniles would be raised in marginal habitat with reduced resources. Survival through invisibility had worked for thousands of years. They were betting it would work again. I hiked back to my vehicle as helicopters circled overhead, and shouted questions echoed through the forest from searchers who had no idea what they were looking for or what finding it would mean. The press conference happened on December 15th as scheduled, Federal Auditorium in Minneapolis. Ray presented the findings with scientific precision. Evidence suggests the presence of an unclassified canid species in the Superior National Forest. Physical characteristics indicate an evolutionary branch divergent from known canis lineages. Population appears limited, possibly fewer than 10 individuals. Critical habitat designation will provide maximum protection while we assess conservation needs. Questions from the media were predictable. Is this Bigfoot? How dangerous are they? Can the public view them? What about hunting concerns? Ray handled it professionally. This is not a cryptid confirmation. This is documentation of a potentially rare species requiring immediate protection. Public safety is not currently a concern. The species appears to avoid human contact. No, there will be no public viewing opportunities. The goal is conservation, not exhibition. The coverage was mixed. Mainstream science treated it cautiously, acknowledging the photographic evidence while noting the need for genetic confirmation. Cryptozoology communities treated it as vindication. Skeptics dismissed it as elaborate hoax despite federal backing. And somewhere in the Superior National Forest, a pack of 4 was learning that federal protection, media attention, and scientific interest all sounded the same, like threat. I resigned from the DNR on December 20th, effective immediately, cited personal reasons, declined interviews, donated my documentation archive to the Federal Conservation Program, with the stipulation that it be used only for protection frameworks, never for closer approach or study that would increase stress on the population. Ray tried to convince me to stay. Marcus, you're the expert. You know their behaviors better than anyone. We need you for management protocols. No, you need me gone. Because my presence is associated with 18 years of surveillance that ended in exposure. They've learned to avoid me. If I stay involved, they'll never trust that protection means distance rather than study. That's not how science works. Maybe not, but that's how coexistence works. And right now, coexistence is the only thing that might keep them alive. Sarah Chen was released from psychiatric care on January 4, 2025. Diagnosis: PTSD with dissociative features. Cause attributed to traumatic wildlife encounter. She'd regained most of her cognitive function, but remained nonverbal about what happened at mile 47. I visited her in February. She was living with her mother, working part-time at a library, rebuilding her life away from the forest. "I'm sorry," I told her. "You encountered something I'd been tracking for 18 years. I should have warned you. Should have told you the risks before we partnered on that patrol." She looked at me for a long time. Then quietly, "Did you find them? The pack?" "Yes." "Are they safe?" "As safe as anything can be when humans know they exist. They've moved deeper into the wilderness. The federal closure is holding for now, but long-term, I don't know. They showed me things," she said, "when I was with them. I don't remember clearly. The doctors say it was stress-induced hallucination. But I remember feeling understood, like they knew I wasn't a threat, like they were choosing to let me go. They were. That's what they do. They assess, they choose, they respond with precision. They're not animals operating on instinct. They're intelligent beings making calculated decisions about survival." "Then maybe," Sarah said slowly, "maybe they're smart enough to survive this too, to adapt like they've adapted to everything else." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that intelligence and adaptation would be enough. But 18 years of observation had taught me, in conflicts between human curiosity and wildlife survival, the wildlife always loses. Eventually, inevitably. The only question was how long this pack could stay hidden before someone with less ethical boundaries than Ray decided comprehensive study was worth the disruption. It's February 2025 now, 3 months since the leak, 2 months since the federal designation, 8 weeks since I last walked in Zone 7. The closure holds. The legal framework is strong. Federal enforcement keeps most civilians out. Research protocols limit academic access. The pack has achieved a fragile protection through bureaucratic inertia and public attention moving to the next viral story. But I know it's temporary, because I've seen the reports. The proposals for minimally invasive collar tracking, the grant applications for genetic sampling, the academic papers proposing close approach behavioral studies, all wrapped in language about conservation and species preservation, all fundamentally about satisfying human curiosity at the expense of the subject's comfort and safety. Ray calls me occasionally. Updates on management decisions, requests for behavioral consultation, invitations to join advisory committees. I decline everything. My role now is witness to what I helped create, the transformation of the invisible into the observed, the free into the managed. They're surviving, Ray told me last week. Camera traps show ongoing presence in the ravine system. The juveniles are growing. Movement patterns suggest stable territory. Your pack is adapting. My pack. As if 18 years of observation created ownership. As if documentation granted custody. But I'm glad they're adapting. Glad that intelligence and caution are proving sufficient, at least for now. I think about Sarah's words often. Maybe they're smart enough to survive this too. Maybe. The pack has survived climate shifts, ecosystem changes, human expansion, and now federal protection with its attendant scrutiny. They've demonstrated cognitive capability that suggests they can model human behavior and adjust their patterns accordingly. But there's a difference between surviving and thriving, between persistence and flourishing. They're no longer living freely in habitat that's theirs by evolutionary right. They're managing existence in spaces we've deemed acceptable, under terms we've established, with freedoms we've granted. That's not coexistence, that's colonization by proxy. We've allowed them to remain, but on our terms, in our framework, subject to our ongoing assessment of whether their continued existence serves purposes we value. I drove past mile marker 47 last week. First time since November. The closure signs are still up. The trail is empty. The forest looks undisturbed to casual observation. But I know better. I know every camera trap position, every monitoring station, every point where human observation penetrates what should be wilderness. Sarah's GPS stopped at mile 47. That's where everything changed. For her, for the pack, for the fragile arrangement we'd maintained for 18 years. I wonder sometimes if Alpha knew, if that approach on Sarah was deliberate, a message delivered through the one ranger who didn't know the history, couldn't interpret the encounter, would respond with trauma that would force disclosure. Maybe Alpha was tired of hiding. Maybe the pack needed official protection more than they needed secrecy. Maybe showing Sarah everything, all the pack members, all their intelligence, all their personhood, was a calculated choice to force humans to acknowledge what we'd been denying. Or maybe it was just bad timing. Sarah in the wrong place, Alpha defending territory. Collision between species that triggered cascading consequences no one intended. I'll never know, and that uncertainty haunts me more than definitive answers would. I keep the archives. 18 years of documentation encrypted on drives stored in 3 locations. Everything from the first marking post in 2006 to the final photographs in December 2024. A complete record of one human's relationship with something that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I review the footage. Watch Alpha move through the forest with that distinctive gait. Watch the juveniles play with a lightness that suggests joy. Watch the pack demonstrate cooperation that mirrors human family structures. And I remember what it felt like to witness something extraordinary in silence. To know something true that the world insisted was impossible. To carry the weight of secrets that protected something precious simply by remaining unspoken. That feeling is gone now. The secrets are exposed. The pack is documented. The weight has shifted from burden of knowledge to burden of consequence. I'm responsible for what happened. My surveillance created the archive that enabled federal designation. My 18 years of careful observation laid the groundwork for the exposure I'd tried to prevent. I was the bridge between their world and ours, and that bridge proved to be one way. There's a sound wolves make when they encounter something they don't understand. That vocalization between whine and growl that signals uncertainty. Alpha makes a similar sound. I have 47 separate recordings across 18 years. But the meaning is different. It's not uncertainty. It's assessment. It's the sound of something intelligent evaluating a situation and deciding how to respond. I heard it the last time I saw the pack in December before they disappeared into the ravine system. Alpha looked at me and made that sound. And I understood. This is your doing. This disruption. This exposure. This end of things as they were. Not accusation. Just fact. Stated plainly by a being intelligent enough to understand causation and consequences. I nodded. Acknowledgement. Agreement. Apology, wrapped in the only gesture that transcended species barriers. Then they were gone. I'm 64 now. Good years left probably, but finite. Time enough to watch how this plays out. Whether the pack survives federal management, whether the juveniles reach breeding age and produce their own young, whether intelligence and adaptation prove sufficient in a world that treats everything rare as either resource or spectacle. I hope they make it. Hope that 50 years from now, researchers will document a stable population. Hope that my 18 years of observation, despite ending in exposure, contributed to their survival rather than their extinction. But hope is fragile when balanced against human nature. We don't leave wild things alone. We manage them, study them, optimize their habitat for efficiency, ensure their reproduction meets statistical targets, transform living beings into data points in conservation models. And the pack knows this. They feel it. Every camera flash, every helicopter pass, every motion sensor activation. The constant pressure of being watched, assessed, managed. That's what I gave them. After 18 years of trying to protect through secrecy, I gave them the weight of being known. I'm sorry. I failed them. And somewhere in the Superior National Forest, in ravines too steep for casual access and forests too dense for easy surveillance, a pack of 4 learns to survive in a world that finally acknowledges they exist, which means a world that will never leave them alone again.